Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Patriot Show. I'm your host Anthony Stephen Malone. Today, I have a very special guest on the show, Colonel Retired William M. Wyatt. Hello, William. How are you doing?
Hey, Anthony, thanks a lot. If you don't mind, call me Chris. I go by Chris. I was born on Christmas Day, so that's what I go by. But
Happy days, mate. All right. Happy days on that. Okay, mate. Can you give my viewers a quick overview of your background, please?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a recently retired U.S. Army colonel, full colonel. I was a 36 and a half year veteran of U.S. Army, 34 of that on active duty, 2 years of that in the Ohio National Guard. I first enlisted in the Army back during the Cold War after a adventure-filled but academically unsuccessful first year at university. And so I went in the Army to grow up a little bit and get some money for school, so I wouldn't be, starving from day to day. And so I saved some money and got some veterans benefits that I contribute to. Went back to university, but while I was enlisted, I served in Europe during the Cold War, was an enlisted soldier and non-commissioned officer in the Signal Corps. Went back to university with the ambition of becoming an intelligence officer in the Army, and then also becoming a regional specialist for Africa. And that's kind of what happened. I graduated from Ohio University, 1989, came back in as a military intelligence officer, wound up in the first Gulf War, wound up in the Balkans on repeated tours involved in that, and some other events that, you can't always talk about some operations, but anyway, so that's the bulk of those things. I was stationed in Germany 3 tours, including enlisted, and then 2 tours as an officer, as a company grade, and then as a field grade officer, a tour in Italy where I was the counterintelligence commander for Southern Europe. And then as an intelligence officer, I served tactical, strategic, signals intelligence. I was a counterintelligence agent, did all those things. Actually had the great fortune of writing for the President of the United States, the famous Presidential Daily Brief. I did that multiple times when I worked at the Defense Intelligence Agency, worked at the National Security Agency. Let's see what else, at the Pentagon. So in Africa, I served in Tunisia, Liberia, Botswana, Malawi, Nigeria, Mauritania, Uganda, and Ethiopia. Those aren't visits. Those were places I lived and worked. In addition to that, I've visited on short term for assignments over probably 35, almost 40 African countries doing work as a soldier or a diplomat. And so I did that. I worked HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, Ebola programs, development, building schools, clinics, roads, wells, peacekeeping training, peacekeeping operations, conflict resolution, civil respect for civil authority, all those different things, counter-terrorism operations, all that across Africa. So that's, I'm a published author in both academic circles and popular journals, whether it's on defense topics. I've been published in South African defense journals and others, and also published as a rugby journalist. I cover rugby. I'm a huge rugby fan and massive rugby fan. I'm a Springbok fan first. Sorry about that. With your accent, you don't sound like a Springbok fan, but I'm a Springbok fan first, and then a USA Eagles fan after that. And I've been to every Rugby World Cup since 2011, New Zealand 2011, Paris for the women 2014, England 2015, Northern Ireland 2017 for the women, San Francisco for the sevens in 2018, and Japan in 2019. Every Rugby World Cup for rugby union, not rugby league. And so that's kind of what I've done. I transitioned, and one of the first things people asked me was, do you miss the Army? And my answer is no, I don't. Let me explain. I don't miss the Army because the Army is a massive bureaucracy. And if you saw the rectal pain that one has to go through to just do travel that they tell you to complete, hey, we want you to go here. Okay. All right. Now you have to suffer all this pain and this bureaucratic minutia, that just stuff like that. Enough of that. You want to be a soldier. You want to get the job done. You want to lead. You want to make it happen. So I don't miss the Army from that standpoint, but I do miss it from standpoint that I was part of something big, something important, something that mattered. I was part of a team. But I always knew that, and I always told my soldiers and my NCOs and my officers that, listen, because, you get some soldiers like, oh, civilians, like, hey, listen, unless you go out with your boots on, which is not the way you want to leave service, you too will be a civilian one day. And so you need to respect those folks. You need to understand that you too will be one to prepare for that day. So I prepared for my separation years before I ever did it, because I was never convinced I would stay in the Army for a career, even up to 36 years in the Army. So I was always preparing for retirement or separation and what came next. And so I always had outside interest, and I never allowed my military identity or my rank certainly to define who I am. And so for me, the transition, I think, has been a lot easier than it is for many people. And most of my peers who spent as much time as in the military as me are either sergeants major or 4-star generals. Because I was enlisted, that's not something that's possible for me with the timeline, but or colonels and above. And a lot of them have a hard time making that switch. For me, it's not been painful. I haven't gained 100 pounds. I still work out every day and exercise, and I take care of my health seriously, and I stay abreast of world events, and I keep active. And I've turned my time during COVID into a broadcast business. And so that's kind of a long-winded, but I think that answers some of what you were getting at.
Yeah, that's basically answered a couple of the questions there. Right. Obviously, your experience is extensive, and we can't go too much into everything anyway, or the operational side of things. You were one of the former chiefs of staff of the National Security Agency. Obviously, you've done a lot of senior work and in the Defence Intelligence Agency as well. Why Africa? You've got all that there, all that you've done all this. Why did you have a passion for Africa?
Well, that's a very good question. Thank you, Anthony. So I get asked this all the time by people who rock up on my broadcast for the first time. And like, hey, who are you? Why do you care about Africa? Why do you know so much about South Africa? Who do you think you are? It's most of it not mean-spirited, but some of it is mean-spirited. Well, as a kid, I watched the liberation era struggles going on, the wars in Rhodesia, in Angola, Mozambique. And I used to follow reading the magazines every week in the library, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, Time, back before there were propaganda papers. They were actually news reporting at that time in the 70s. And I followed these things, and I was fascinated by it. I always had a keen interest in German ethnic studies. I didn't know why. It turns out I actually have German ancestry. I didn't know that at the time. And so I wound up having an interest in Africa. But in high school, I read a book by a famous American fiction writer who was a World War II vet. His name was James Michener. He wrote a whole series of books, and he picks a topic, and he takes real events and real people and weaves in fictional characters to tell a story. And his first big success was a book called Hawaii. And then he did all these other books, Space, Poland, Texas, the list goes on Chesapeake. He wrote a book called The Covenant. And somehow I got a hold of it in high school, and I got a paperback edition of it. It was 1,200 pages of fine print. And it was a historical fiction about South Africa. And I read this, and I'm like, wow, what an incredibly screwed up but fascinating country. And so my interest, which was already going towards Africa, became more refined around 1980. I graduated from high school, went to university, studied history, and then went in the army. And when I was in Europe in the 80s, this is when Ethiopia's famine, We Are the World came along and all that stuff. And I was already looking at environmental issues in Africa, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I developed a keen interest in Africa, and it just built on it from there, from one thing after the other. Initially, I only cared about South Africa and Southern Africa. I did research on ethnic Germans in Namibia and other places, and German colonial history in Tanganyika. And so it went from there to being the focus of my undergraduate degree. When I came back, I focused on Africa history in particular. And I just started learning languages. I speak 6 languages today. 3 of them are African. And it just kind of went from there. And I decided when I was a private first class sitting in the education center in Bad Kreuznach, Germany in 1984, I was sitting down signing up for a university class on the weekend. And there was a pamphlet there. And I picked it up and it says, the U.S. Army Foreign Area Officer Program. I'm like, let's see, you go to graduate school and they pay for it. I like that. You spend a year in an embassy, essentially as an intern in a country overseas. I like that. And we send you to language school where you pick up a foreign language. I love that. So that's what I want to do when I grow up. And so I made a plan in 1984 that I wanted to be regular Army, because there's a distinction between a reserve officer and an active regular Army officer. There's a limited by law how many regular Army officers. I wanted to be regular Army, military intelligence. I wanted to become a foreign area officer for sub-Saharan Africa, make full colonel, actually wrote that in pencil on my education record, it's still there, and become the defense attaché in South Africa. And that was my career goals. I set that in 1984. Every one of those did become true. I made them a reality, either through good fortune or good performance or a combination of the two, except I was never the defense attaché in South Africa, because as I became a full colonel, the U.S. Africa Command decided that, well, we're going to give that position to the Navy. And so it was no longer an Army position. So I couldn't do it. And then also it's about timing. You have to rotate at the right time. And my assignments weren't on right cycle. So when I was available for reassignment, that position was filled. And when I was not available, it was open. So, but all those goals I set, that's how the interest in Africa came about. And when I was an undergraduate at Ohio University in the late 1980s, I wanted another language. I already had German because I self-taught myself German, being stationed in Germany. And then I took classes to get the the grammar when I was at university. So I didn't want to study French because I didn't care for France, and I didn't want to study Arabic because I didn't care for that part of the world. And so I said, I need a language a lot of people speak, and in Africa, a lot of people speak Swahili. So I took a year of intensive Swahili at university as an undergraduate, my last year. And then the summer, I spent 3 months speaking Swahili all day long, every day. And that's just kind of where the interest in Africa came from. And it's always grown from there.
No, yeah, it's very difficult to say. Once you've been in Africa, you've lived with the people, you've been with the people throughout the different countries and the culture. It stays with you forever. Difficult to explain to somebody that who's not ever been there. But yeah, that is what it is. Out of all the African countries you've been to, which one do you prefer? I know that's a very difficult question.
It is a difficult question. And I would say that if this was 2000,
Yeah.
I might say South Africa, but it's 2021. So I can't say South Africa. I would have to say that of the countries I've worked and lived in Africa, the one that's most appealing and interesting and safest in so many respects is Botswana. If you look behind me, you'll see all kinds of baskets on my shelves. Those are actually all from Botswana.
Okay, what in your opinion? It's interesting you said about South Africa. I was out in South Africa 2000, and to see it go the way it has to what it is now, it's like complete polar opposites. What do you think are the major changes that have happened across the African continent from a security point of view, the past 10 years, the past 20 years?
Across the continent? Well, there's conflict on the continent, and it ebbs and flows. It comes and goes. But the nature of conflict has changed demonstrably. We've gone from state-on-state conflict with Somalia and Ethiopia, Uganda and Tanzania and other countries, states fighting each other, to that becoming largely a thing of the past, which is good. It's good when one country doesn't invade another country. Yeah. But that has transitioned to all sorts of and while that was going on, we also had liberation struggles in Southern Africa, particularly to overthrow governments down there, whether it was Angola, Rhodesia, Mozambique, Namibia, or South Africa. That's also transitioned to where there was relative peace for a while, but we'd still have the occasional coup d'etat, especially in West Africa or Central Africa, overthrowing a democratically elected government or not a democratically elected government, to the rise of extremism, which has become rampant in the Sahel and in East Africa in particular. Of course, the Sahel is that belt that runs across just below the Sahara Desert. The narrow band of semi-desert runs all the way across from Senegal and Mauritania to Eritrea on the other side of the continent. And it's a band where there's always been problems. There's always been brigandry and trafficking. It's been going on forever. But events and poor governance, weak governance, excuse me, as well as the rise of transnational terrorist groups has fueled this sort of thing. So you have Boko Haram in Nigeria, which was a domestic Nigerian problem that grew because the government ignored it and caused the problem, quite frankly. And then it metastasized and it affects the entire region now. You've got Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, an offshoot of bin Laden's Al-Qaeda. You've got you got Boko Haram, I mentioned already, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and the list goes on. And then you have groups now that claim affiliation with ISIS operating in Cabo Delgado province in Mozambique. This is kind of where conflict has gone. And we've also still had states implode in the last decade. The Central African Republic collapsed. It's not the only place, but it's a serious problem. And the real challenge is that people outside of Africa find themselves embroiled or enmeshed or involved in these conflicts, whether they intended to or not. So, for instance, the United States, France are deeply involved in the Sahel conflicts in Mali and Niger. Whether we want to be or not, we're deeply involved. U.S. was, under Obama, became deeply involved in Somalia, but Trump has pretty much ended that. We'll see where Biden takes Somalia, but we pretty much were pulling back from Somalia. So it's kind of all over the place. But right now, the biggest security issues in Africa are either physical criminal issues, whether it's narco trafficking or corruption or theft or physical security, murders and things like that. That's a major concern for most Africans in many countries. But beyond that, it's this transnational sort of thing, or local groups that claim affiliation with transnational organizations. And it's disrupting governance across wide swaths of Africa.
Yeah. In your experience, because we've noticed a lot of organized crime in the Middle East and terrorist networks actually working together or being part of the same organization. Have you seen a similar pattern across Africa?
Well, I don't know if it's a pattern, but there's certainly cases of it. Guinea-Bissau essentially became a narco-terrorist state for a while. Basically, the drug traffickers bringing cocaine and other things, whether it's heroin coming from Asia or cocaine coming from Latin America, it was coming to Guinea-Bissau where the government allowed these people to fly in and do what they want to do, and they would transship this stuff to Europe and flood Europe with these drugs. So that was going on for a better part of 15 years. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that the Boko Haram mess in Nigeria, the people who started that uprising didn't have weapons. They demonstrated in front of a police station. The police fled and left all the weapons in the locker. They broke into the police station and got guns. And then the government of Nigeria is like, we don't know where these guns are coming from. They're coming from your armory. That's where they're coming from. And then when the 6th Infantry Division, 6th Division marched into the northeast of Nigeria to put down Boko Haram, the soldiers were poorly led, ill-disciplined. When they encountered a firefight, they dropped their weapons and ran away. So Boko Haram just walked onto the streets and picked up the weapons from the Nigerian army. So there's criminal element there that was involved, although Boko Haram wasn't a criminal organization, but it did resort to crime. And then you've got things like in Somalia, where Al-Shabaab cornered the charcoal market. And the charcoal market is critically important for fuel, to cook food, to heat with, and to stay warm. And so they cornered the charcoal market and got a lot of their funding from charcoal. And also piracy came in later on, but charcoal market is where they got a lot of money. So criminal activity fueling terrorism or supporting terrorism. And that's not the only examples, but that's just the most obvious ones.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. That's just examples, because there's a lot that's going on at the moment over there. In Sierra Leone, there was the Blood Diamonds civil wars as well. Has that died down a little bit, or is that still bubbling away under the surface?
Well, the term blood diamond, of course, is something that was popularly attributed to illicit diamonds. The illicit diamond trade continues, but it is like every other industry suffered a bit because, so we had in 2008, 2009, the global financial implosion, which nearly brought down the entire global financial system, which never should have happened, but it did. Botswana, for instance, lost 90% of diamond revenue virtually overnight. From like today to the next day, people stop buying diamonds. Now, De Beers and Botswana, which is a concern, a mixture between De Beers and the government of Botswana, they formed this thing called Botswana. They control most of the diamond production in Botswana. They kept mining and they kept people working. They just stockpiled the diamonds because that's what they've always done. They've always kept a pile of diamonds and they can control the flow so the price doesn't get out of whack. But they lost all the revenue. The same sort of thing has happened in 2020. Because diamond sales dropped precipitously because people lost jobs. In the U.S., we had 42 million people thrown out of work. I mean, that's far more than the Great Depression. That's amazing. Now, a lot of those people got back to work, fortunately, but so global demand for things like diamonds dropped, but demand has picked back up, particularly in China and also here in the U.S. now, and sales are back up. But this whole thing with blood diamonds, this connotation of blood diamonds was tied to illicit diamonds. So they came up with a process, the Kimberley process, to etch the diamonds, to identify them, to show they were legitimate sources. That has helped somewhat and reduce that market, but there are still illicit diamonds that flood onto the marketplace. So that's still a phenomenon that happens. The thing is that criminals will always find a way.
Yeah.
No matter what measures you put in place, criminals will always find a way, or people that want to take advantage of other people. That's why I always get a kick out of people like, well, we don't need police. Let's defund the police. We don't need military. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's nice that you live in utopia, but that's not the nature of Homo sapiens. I don't know what planet you're living on. Maybe it's Alpha Centauri or the moons of Jupiter or something like that. But here on Earth, Homo sapiens, a small percentage of them have a tendency to misbehave and take advantage of others, regardless of what the circumstances are. So you need measures in place to deal with them or to punish transgressors. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that point up because of COVID and everything going on in the world at the moment. There's not a lot of news on Africa. I just wanted my viewers to be aware. It's obviously still there. And a lot of the wars, activity and the conflicts are still going on at the moment over there. Have you come across a lot of, or is the trafficking of humans still a problem across Africa?
Oh, absolutely. Well, not just Africa. I mean, it's a major problem the world over. Europe, especially Western Europe, it's a massive problem. It is a huge problem in Africa. And the trafficking, of course, is all sorts of things: sex slavery, labor. But a main part of it is trafficking people into Europe, getting them across the Mediterranean and into Europe. Because once you get into the Schengen zone, it's just free for all. Cops don't even ask you for identification. You can go wherever you want. As long as you travel, you're okay. So that's the goal for people, to get in the Schengen zone. And if it's the soft underbelly of Italy, or through the Spanish enclaves in Morocco, or, on boats that get across to somewhere, that's the goal of a lot of people. Of course, they don't stay in Italy. Most of these people, they flood into Germany, where the benefits are outrageous and the protections are unusual, or the UK, although that's been mitigated somewhat with Brexit. Although the UK was never part of the Schengen agreement. So, but people don't know that. They just hear UK, European Union, and they all want to get there. That's why if you look at Calais, you have tens of thousands of Africans trying to get across the channel to the UK, when it was part of the European Union, because they just assumed that once they're in, they're in. But it wasn't the same, because the UK never joined it. But yeah, the human trafficking is a major problem. And in fact, having worked in embassies, one of the things I was responsible for each year was to contribute to the human trafficking report. The United States Department of State does a human trafficking report on every country in the world. Now, a lot of countries, it's not an issue, or it's a minor issue. It's not the country itself. They just are a victim of trafficking. But there are countries that actually actively allow or facilitate this sort of thing, and play a role in it. So we'd have to contribute to that each year and have to give input on that report. It's compiled by the State Department, but other agencies that work in our embassies also contribute, because we go out and deal with security services and with the civil environment and the judicial system. So we also observe things and we contribute to it. So yeah, it's something that I pay very close attention to. When you hear people talk about reparations for slavery today, I don't want to say I get a kick out of it, because that's the wrong way to say it, but I always I'm bemused by the fact that while they want to talk about reparations for events that ended 160 years ago, they have no compassion for the 75 million people currently living as slaves around the world today, a large number of them in sexual servitude. I would not want to be a teenage Moldovan girl and grow up there. You're highly likely to be kidnapped or trafficked into sex slavery in Istanbul, or in Paris, or in Manchester, or New York, or something like that. It's not a good thing. And it's not, by the way, it's not just that. I mean, we have so many kids human trafficked in the United Kingdom. Especially English girls were sold into sexual slavery and covered up by the law enforcement there. We have it happen here in the United States. It's a global phenomenon. And the human trafficking in Africa is to other destinations, primarily to Europe, but also to other destinations.
Okay, I just wanted to bring that point up there, because I wanted people to realize it is a problem, and it is a big one, and it does need to be addressed. What successes and what lessons can be learned about documenting or trying to stop a lot of the human trafficking? In your experience, just your experience over the past 10 years, 20 years, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's downplayed, but one of the roles that really plays a key part in this is governments have to be serious about their sovereignty. We see the clear, stark difference between two administrations here in the United States. And I'm not picking, I'm just stating facts here. The Trump administration, which publicly made a big deal about border security and sovereignty of the United States, and the Biden administration, which has made a big deal about undermining and removing that. We've just had a record number of apprehensions in February for people illegally crossing the border. 101,500 were apprehended. How many got through? That's how many were apprehended on the border. That's insane. Now, a lot of these people are being trafficked. They're being trafficked by coyotes and groups brought into this country. And then the same thing happens out of Asia. We have thousands of Chinese that flood in this country illegally in containers on ships every year at Long Beach and places like that. And they owe the coyotes who bring them in $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, and they have to work it off as labor slaves or as sex slaves. But one of the things, excuse me, just a second here. Just can you give me a second here? My phone's ringing. I got to stop it from ringing. Sorry.
No, not a problem at all. What we're going to speak about in a second when we come back is coyotes, is what we refer to as the organized groups, mostly criminal groups in Central America that bring people into the United States. Chris, I was just giving a quick explanation of what a coyote is. We refer to coyotes as being, obviously, the criminal organizations that help to traffic from Central America. I just wanted to make that point over because I think some viewers might not know what that is.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you. I was about to do that. And I apologize for that, but I have an alarm set on my phone every day for my regular broadcast, which is about an hour, just to remind me, hey, stop doing research. Make sure you're ready for your show. And so I forgot my phone was in the other room because I didn't realize we were going to do this interview now. But anyway, so yeah, so thank you for explaining that. I was about to explain that. Yeah, the coyotes are a term for the traffickers who illicitly get people into the country. And they can be quite nasty. Some of them, in fact, most of them are. But where we were talking about the oh, yeah. So you're asking it. So the question was this, and I was headed toward this point. The role of a government in establishing border security and prosecution of people for breaking these laws plays a paramount role. We saw the amount of human trafficking coming into this country, not just the southern border, but also on planes, on ships, which is where a lot of people come illicitly, drop precipitously when the Trump administration announced publicly that they're going to take border security seriously and tighten down and increase inspections and build a wall and do more port security. We saw the numbers of people being trafficked in this country drop immensely. Now, Europe with Schengen and allowing people to have the understanding that Schengen means you can go wherever you want with no repercussions. All you got to do is get inside. People know that. They know that from Africa, from Middle East. And here's the thing. This whole thing with refugees gets blown out of proportion. The international protocols on refugee status state that the person becomes a refugee in the first safe harbor they arrive at in another country, another place. So if you're a Syrian and you show up in Turkey, that's where you must apply for asylum. But what we have happening is that politicians lying to the world, which is fueling human trafficking because people take advantages. And we have people refugee asylum shopping. So you have over 1 million people who flooded into Germany because Merkel's governance. And she said, yeah, come here. You can have asylum. But there's no country on Germany's borders that's in a situation that would warrant anyone seeking political asylum in Germany. Not Denmark, not the Netherlands, not Luxembourg, France, Switzerland, Austria, the Czech Republic, Poland. None of those countries have political prisoners that are being oppressed or are victims of warfare or genocide. Or that's nonsense. All the Syrians, all the Afghans, all the Africans have no business seeking asylum there. And the same thing here. Mexicans, because the drug war, could legitimately make an asylum claim to come to the United States, but not El Salvadorans. They have countries that are safe next to them. And so what happens is that when countries don't take it seriously, you fuel the desire to go places for opportunity. A lot of people are just looking for opportunity. They want to improve their lives. I get that. But you also fuel the illicit trafficking people. And it's not a good thing. And it's the fault of politicians, either not enforcing their laws, not enforcing their sovereignty, or not addressing it. And one of the problems with this trafficking is that the people that do this are very nasty, and they're very serious, and they're very powerful, and they're very wealthy, and they have lots of little people they can sacrifice down the totem pole to run these syndicates to traffic these people, particularly sex slavery. And it's very scary. And cops are bought off or they're eliminated in a lot of places. And so it takes some very powerful, very courageous people to face this. And in today's world of political correct wokeness, I think we lack that across the globe.
I think it's a very important point you brought up there about just how powerful some of these people is. I'll give my viewers a bit of an insight. Just in the United Kingdom alone, the human trafficking was valued at something like 1 billion 1 year. That's it. That's just the United Kingdom. Now, if you think it's 1 billion in each of these countries, you're looking at something like a criminal enterprise that is something in the region of 20 billion a year. I think it's going to be a lot more than that if we were to really go into it. But that is a lot of money. So in a lot of countries, they have problems with this as well. Chris, in your opinion, that what you have seen as an in officer as well, we found in the Middle East, which I think is the same in Africa, a lot of the terrorist organizations were using the same pipelines and the routes of trafficking to be able to move some people or equipment along those lines. So my thought process was, if the government can close down or help to close down the human trafficking lines, it's also helping to close down terrorist lines. They're one of the same. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I would have to agree with you, Anthony. It's these you say route lines. I like to call them rat lines, but
That lines. I was
yeah.
trying to be politely clear there, like.
Yeah. But no, absolutely. I mean, let's just take, for example, the Sahara and the Sahel, which I've already talked about.
Yeah.
There are ethnic groups that operate and live in the Sahel, like the Tuareg. Of course, people that drive Volkswagens know what a Tuareg is. It's an SUV, but no, it's actually a loose confederation of tribes in the Sahel, clustered primarily in Niger, but also in neighboring countries like Libya and Algeria, and and also Mali. But the Tuareg have for centuries run illicit trafficking routes for all sorts of things, whether it was gold or slaves. It evolves over time. Then cigarettes and alcohol, and now weapons, cigarettes, alcohol, and human trafficking. It's all, and these routes have been established for centuries, whether it's on foot or more modern in vehicles. People know the routes, they know the watering points they can get to, and they take people through the desert to locations, load them up on ships, and send them across. And it's the same whether it's drugs or, but people are easier because, you can make a person move. You can't make the drugs move. You have to pick them up and carry them. So you can stick a gun in somebody's belly and they'll start moving at your behest, but you can't stick a gun in a pile of heroin and get it to move. You've actually got to take action or have the resources. So human trafficking, in some respects, it's difficult in some other respects, but in some respects it's easier. And you're right, they use existing networks and lines, and these criminal enterprises very easily adapt themselves or facilitate all of this activity. So if you go after terrorists or if you go after human traffickers, you have an adverse effect on both and also other criminal activity, which is the shame. The real shame in this is that when governments don't take their sovereignty seriously, it's to the detriment. These people that think that, listen, you got to have compassion for people. You have to understand everyone has a right to go where they want. No, nobody has a right to go anywhere. We have a system of sovereign states since the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. That's the first thing. Second thing is that, yes, compassion is fine, but you can't have compassion if your compassion means you allow people to be smuggled into the United States to work for $2 an hour, $4, $8 below the going wage, depressing wages, putting people at home out of work while giving people from abroad who are here illegally the opportunity to work, but working the underground so they can be exploited. That's not compassion. That's not right. And that's the same thing happening in Europe. You have millions of people who are illegally in Europe who are working illicitly, and Europeans are very experienced. I mean, Germans know how to evade taxes. Italians know how to evade taxes, especially when it comes to labor taxes. And so you already have a system inherent that because of high taxation, that it's not unusual to hire people that you pay wages under the table. And that facilitates human trafficking. That facilitates all of this illicit movement. And when governments tolerate this, they send a clear signal. Joe Biden has made a very clear signal. He doesn't care about U.S. I'm sorry to go into politics, but he doesn't care about U.S. national security at our southern border. You do what you want. In fact, he took 25,000 people who had requested asylum, who were in Mexico applying for asylum in the United States, almost none of them Mexicans. And the Trump administration worked a deal out with Mexico that they would house them there. Well, he decided to bring them across. 15 to 25% of the people they allowed to come in our country, which, by the way, who were released as soon as they came to the country, were COVID positive. So, he talked about security, but he just let, 15 to 25% of the people, the 25,000 came in, brought COVID with them. Why are we importing disease? We banned travel from South Africa. Why are we letting people come in here? Anyway, it's stupidity. And that sort of idiotic policy sends a very clear message to traffickers. Hey, you're not serious. We're going to take advantage of it. This is an incredibly profitable enterprise. And who cares if this 15-year-old girl is a sex slave? It's not my problem. I made my money. And now that's satire. That's not me speaking. And for those, make sure that's clear. That's a trafficker.
It's there's a lot of deep-rooted concerns, I think, there. And I think the trafficking routes, people don't like talking about it, but because it's now connected to the organized crime, into international terrorism networks as well, it needs to be revisited and looked at again. Otherwise, it's going to get a lot worse. Just to take you back a little bit as well. Obviously, I'm a veteran, you're a veteran as well. A lot of veterans are going through a hard time at the moment across the United States and England as well. Have you got a message for anyone out there?
Oh, absolutely. First off, transition, whether you served an entire career and you're a retiree or you did a tour or a couple of tours you got out, whether you're a combat veteran or you never served in combat, people always look at the veteran, they assume a combat veteran, and but veterans come in all shapes and sizes, men, women. We come from all backgrounds, all services, even those people in the Navy and Air Force. We have to remember they're veterans too. Sorry, that was a dig. But no, but seriously, the thing is that when you transition back to civilian life, for a lot of people, it's difficult. Some people, it's traumatic. Their entire identity is wrapped up in who they were, whether it was their position or their rank or being part of a team. And this can be especially difficult for people in special forces, very close, small unit formations in which they work closely together. You rely on team members and suddenly your team's not there anymore. But what I would say to folks, to veterans and those serving who are going to become veterans, is that do not allow your identity to be subsumed by what you're a part of. Be all in. If you're in Delta Force, if you're an Army Ranger, if you're SAS, be all in, be part of the team, do your role, but remember who you are, because here's the bottom line. When you leave the service, if you've given it all for God and country, that's great. But if you haven't taken care of your family, or you haven't got a family because you've put it all in there, and you haven't taken care of yourself, you're going to find life to be very difficult. You're not going to have a support structure around you because that team is no longer around you. And you have to be honest with yourself. You can't be a Ranger forever. We don't have 75-year-old Army Rangers. We don't have SAS guys that are 65 years old. It just doesn't work that way. So you have to accept that it is part of your life, but it shouldn't be all that you are. And if you make that distinction, your transition will be far simpler. And I hate the word transition because that word has been appropriated in this country. It almost sounds like, a sex change operation, but that's how it's been associated here now. But so a lot of people on LinkedIn would say, I'm transitioning, and one of my colleagues who's a left-leaning academic, she'd always chuckle and she goes, wow, I didn't know all these people were having sex changes. I'm like, no. Okay. So I've never identified myself as a transitioning person. I'm not transitioning. I've just returned to civilian life. That's how I put it. But if you retain your identity, who you are. And understandably, when we bring people into uniform, we break down who they are. That's part of the inculcation process. We go to basic training, we go to qualification courses, and you're remolded and reshaped to the values and standards of the service that you support and defend. And that means you don't get rid of or lose, but a bit of yourself is put on the shelf for a little bit there because you have to be that other person. But you can't lose what's on the shelf. It's got to be an integral part of who you are. Yeah. When I was an enlisted soldier, I worked for the 8th Infantry Division Color Guard, which was a great pride of mine. I carried the national colors, great pride. I still am so proud that I did that to this day. And that was almost 40 years ago now. And we would do funerals. Now, remember that in the 1980s, we had 400,000 American veterans, former service members who over the years would retire and decide to stay in Germany because they're married Germans or they found the life great there. When I was on the Color Guard, we did funerals. I did 3 or 4 funerals per month for sergeants major, especially, or senior NCOs, and occasionally for lieutenant colonels and colonels who retired in Germany. Why and how? Most of these people, especially the NCOs, died 6 to 9 months after they retired. They could not that they weren't suicides, but they just couldn't handle the transition of having been a first sergeant, been a platoon sergeant, been a battalion commander, and then you had all this responsibility, all these people's lives were on the line. You took your job seriously. You stopped from one day to the next, you're civilian, and they were lost. They were completely lost because they became subsumed, and it affected their health. People gained weight. They had strokes, heart attacks. And I buried a lot of sergeants major, and I looked at this as a young man in my 20s. I'm like, well, that ain't going to be me. No, sir. I'm not going to let that happen to me. So my word to serving soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen around the world and Coast Guardies is that don't let who you are in uniform become all that you are. And if you can avoid that, then you'll have a successful, there will always be challenges. You're human beings. You're going to be challenged by something, whether it's a spouse that gets on your nerves, or you get on your spouse's nerves, or your children drive you nuts, or you have difficulty finding employment. Those are all issues that everybody on the planet faces. But you face unique challenges because you were in a unique organization doing something that, frankly, very few people are capable of doing. And remember that as a veteran, remember that. Whether you serve for 2 years or 35 years, you did something in your country, whether it's UK, US, Germany, wherever, that most people are either incapable or unwilling to do, either because they're unqualified, they're not suitable for it, or they don't have the inclination to do it. You have supported and defended your nation and its national security interests, and you should take pride in that. As long as you behaved yourself, you should take pride in that. And remember that, and then don't let yourself be swallowed up by your military persona. And I think you'll do fine. For me, the transition was relatively easy from a standpoint that I never let that happen. I never carried my rank on my shoulders. I mean, I was a full-blown colonel. That's kind of a high position, but I never walked around like, oh, look at me. That was never, hey, look, it's the colonel. I mean, no, that was never me. Now I did expect proper military courtesy and discipline, and I returned it because that's what you do in uniform. But it was never who I was. Actually, I've been called the colonel more in retirement from active service than I was in active duty, because all these civilians who follow my program love to call me the colonel. So they're always calling me the colonel. So yeah, anyway, just don't let it subsume you. And that'll put you so much further ahead of the game than you realize when you start becoming a civilian again.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. The other thing I want to just quickly touch on is you're a mentor at a Catholic college, and you help to mentor a lot of the veterans from Special Forces, the SEALs, and Delta. Can you give us a little bit overview of that, please?
Absolutely. So I was contacted by someone who worked at the Catholic College of Wyoming Catholic College, I should say, which is out in Leander, just at the base of the Wind River Basin mountains out there, the Rocky Mountains. It's a private college which has expanded. They just have a few hundred students there, but they've created additional programs which involve outdoor. So they take their students and they take them out in the mountains, and they kind of just put them out there. They give them a kit, they give them a bit of rations, and they have a guide that's with them. And then the students have to have a plan, and they have to camp out and travel throughout the mountains. And they do this for a few weeks before they even start at college. And it kind of forms a cohort in which their 4 years as undergraduates, they have a relationship with other people at school, and they got to know each other and count and rely on each other. Same sort of thing we go through in uniform. It's almost like going to a Ranger Q course, but not nearly as difficult as that. So they already had this, and they said, why don't we take, and they created a nonprofit company that has all the rucksacks and the camping kit, the cooking stoves, all the stuff you need for that. And also has trained guides who are trained in hiking and know the routes and all the things and all the safety measures and first aid and all that. So they created this company to facilitate that for the college students. And then they started sponsoring religious groups and businesses that want to come out there to help them do retreats and spiritual things like that in the mountains. And so someone at the university or at the college decided that, hey, we should really do something for veterans. Veterans have a tough time transitioning, and we see this all the time, especially with some who come to our college who are veterans, and we see they have a hard time adjusting. So we'd like to create this mentoring program in which we bring veterans out here, and when they spend a week, they hike into the mountains, because veterans, you give a military person an objective, they plan for it, they execute, they succeed. And we bring them out here, we do that, and we'll have mentors in the group who will talk about life issues, whether it's starting a business, whether it's maintaining your family, whether it's spiritual welfare and health and fitness, or it's transitioning from life. It's all about transitioning. And so I was asked to be part of that and be a mentor, and I did. And it was interesting for me. I was never a special forces person. I worked with them extensively, Delta and at Rangers and special forces, all those things. And so they invited them out, and folks were in these organizations. And I was the only one that wasn't one of the special forces guys out there. But I was also one of the ones that always finished first on the ruck march. So I'll say that. But anyway, so because when you're an MI guy, military intelligence, you don't want to be the last guy showing up when it's something physical. You always got to be at the front. So I was always fit and made sure I was there. Otherwise, your credibility's gone. But anyway, so we went out there, we would camp for a week, and we would gather during the day, at least once a day, and we would have a topic that would be the topic of the day. And the reason they wanted me out there is because someone had noticed that they were watching me as I was coming close to retirement, and they were noticing that I was doing a lot of activity and building towards something. And what I was doing is building a consultancy business. I hadn't started, but I put all the pieces in place and made sure I had all the bona fides. So when I started, I could start from get-go. And they saw my business start, and they liked my approach. And they saw what I did online with YouTube and how I expanded my broadcasting there. And they really liked that idea, and they wanted me to talk about it. So I went out there and I shared my thoughts and some of the things I've just shared with you for veterans. And I think it's a brilliant program. Wyoming Catholic College is going to continue that, and they're going to have it again this year. I don't know if I'll be involved because the idea is to switch it up. So we might have different mentors, but I might be going back. And if I do, it will be probably in July or September. Last year it was supposed to be in July. They had to delay it because they tried to make it so that it was cost-free for the veterans, which meant they got donations from people to sponsor the program. But it wasn't entirely cost-free for veterans, but they're trying to make that the case. So last year, because of COVID, it didn't happen in June. Into July, it got pushed to September, which for me was perfect. Beginning of September, the mountains in the Rocky Mountains, you get cold, we get frost, a little bit of snow sometimes in the morning, but it's not the sub-zero temperatures, and it's also not the blazing summertime when you're like, fighting mosquitoes all summer. I prefer to avoid fighting mosquitoes. So that's kind of what I did with Lyman Catholic College. It was quite an incredible experience. And it was nice to see that. Oh, by the way, I also thought I was going to be one of the younger guys there. It turns out I was almost the oldest veteran there at 55. There was a guy who was 56 who had me by a couple months. But so I'm with these veterans who are in their 30s, a couple in their 20s, and we're carrying 60, 80 pounds in rucksacks, hiking up 10,000 feet. So it was quite an interesting experience. But that was nice because those are skills that the special operators had in uniform, and they got to bring it back and we got to share. And so the transition discussion was pretty interesting.
Pretty good. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been emotional as always, and I think my viewers would have found that very interesting as well. I know you've got a lot on at the moment anyway. If you can stay on the line for a couple of minutes, would you like to say anything to anyone else?
Sure, absolutely. As I said, don't let what you wear on your collar identify who you are. It's a part of who you are, but it's temporal. It's a period of time, and it doesn't last forever. I mean, you're not still a private, you're not still a sergeant, you're not still a lieutenant, you're not a captain. You either go up or you go out, or you move on. So just remember that, as the famous phrase, "This too shall pass," but usually that's about bad things. But the good times, this too shall pass, and don't ever regret your service. Some people look back and say, why did I do this? You probably made the right decision for yourself and for your nation, and probably for your family as well, at least in most cases. So thank you for your service. Anthony, thank you for yours. And thank you for everyone out there who served in uniform. It's a unique fraternity of men and women that most people will never, ever understand or ever participate in. So thank you for your service.
Thank you for your services as well, Chris, as ever, because you've done a hell of a lot. Most of it we can't even speak about on camera anyway. If you can hold the line for 2 minutes, I'm just going to close the interview down. Everyone who's watching the show for Patriot, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Please stay on the channel for another couple of minutes, because we've got some veteran-owned promotions for the companies owned by veterans, both in the United Kingdom and across the United States as well. Thank you for watching the show, everyone. Catch you on the next one. Take care. Stay safe. Goodbye.